The testing chamber hummed with that particular frequency that made my secondary stomachs churn. I had been administering the human certification trials for 73 cycles now, and still, the sound got to me every single time. Maybe it was my body's way of warning me. Maybe it knew something I didn't. "Candidate approaching," my assistant Vex chirped from his monitoring station, his three eyes blinking in sequence like malfunctioning light panels. I glanced at the holographic display floating before me. Subject K879, human, female, age 22 standard rotations, name Kira Voss. Oh, wonderful. Another human who probably thought she could waltz through the trials like they were some sort of carnival game. Humans. They were the galaxy's favorite comedy act, really. Showed up about 200 years ago with their rickety ships and their stubborn attitudes, convinced they belonged among the stars. The Galactic Council had laughed. Then they had stopped laughing when humans started passing impossible tests. Then they had gotten nervous. Then they had made the trials harder. Much, much harder. "Vital signs?" I asked, adjusting my ceremonial robes. They itched like mad, but protocol was protocol. Elevated heart rate, increased adrenaline, normal cortisol levels for pre-trial stress, Vex reported, his vocal cords producing that squeaky sound that reminded me of a damaged air filtration unit. "She appears calm? For a human, anyway." Calm? Right. I had heard that before. They always appeared calm, right up until the moment the trials began, and they realized that difficult, in galactic terms, meant virtually impossible, in any reasonable species terms. The entrance portal shimmered, and she walked in. First thing I noticed? She was small. Humans were always smaller than they seemed in the propaganda videos. This one stood maybe 5.5 feet tall, with dark hair pulled back in what humans called a ponytail. Practical. Her eyes swept the chamber once, cataloging exits, monitoring equipment, the hovering examination drone in the corner. Those eyes were green, bright green, the kind of green that looked like it could see through your lies. "Examiner Thul 9?" she asked, her voice steady. Too steady. "That would be me," I replied, trying to inject the appropriate amount of bureaucratic disinterest into my tone. "You are Kira Voss, human, applying for Tier 3 galactic citizenship and the accompanying commercial transport license? That's correct. You understand that the trials consist of 3 phases: physical endurance, mental acuity, and crisis management. You understand that the failure rate for your species is 94.6%. You understand that injury is common, and that death, while rare, is not unprecedented." She smiled. Actually smiled. "I've read the waiver." The waiver was 47 pages long and written in Galactic Standard Legal, which was deliberately impenetrable even to native speakers. Something twitched in my primary brain. Suspicion, maybe, or indigestion. "Very well. We begin in 30 seconds. The examination drone will accompany you and record all actions. Do not touch the drone. Do not damage the drone. The drone is worth more than your planet's entire agricultural output." I paused. "Questions?" "Just one," Kira said, rolling her shoulders in a gesture I had learned meant humans were preparing for physical activity. "When I pass, do I get a certificate? Or is it digital?" Vex made a choking sound. I felt my face plates heat up, which was the Thullian equivalent of a blush. The audacity. The absolute, breathtaking audacity. "When you pass?" I repeated slowly. I didn't stutter. Her smile widened. "Just want to know, for my records." Oh, this was going to be fun. in the way that watching a meteor hurtle toward your homeworld was fun. Technically interesting, definitely memorable, absolutely catastrophic. Phase 1 begins now, I announced, perhaps with more satisfaction than was professional. The chamber floor split open, revealing the pit beneath. The pit. That magnificent, horrible pit filled with every environmental hazard we could legally throw at candidates. Gravity shifts, temperature extremes, atmospheric pressure changes, and my personal favorite, the floating platforms that rearranged themselves every 15 seconds. 3 miles of vertical nightmare. Humans usually took one look and requested immediate withdrawal. Kira walked to the edge, peered down, and nodded once. Cute. Cute? I had seen trained military personnel from 6 different species weep at the sight of the pit. Cute? Whenever you're ready, I managed to say. She stepped off the edge. No hesitation. No preparation. Just stepped off like she was walking down a flight of stairs in her dwelling. The examination drone hummed to life, its multiple sensors activating as it swooped after her, recording every moment. I pulled up the visual feed on my display, Vex crowding beside me to watch. Kira plummeted through the first gravity shift, her body twisting mid-air to catch the first platform with her hands. She swung herself up in one smooth motion, landed in a crouch, and immediately jumped to the next platform as the one beneath her feet began rotating violently. "She's fast," Vex whispered. "Beginning is always easy," I muttered, but I was lying, and we both knew it. The beginning was never easy. Candidates usually spent the first 5 minutes figuring out the rhythm. She had figured it out in 5 seconds. The temperature dropped. I watched the thermal sensors register a shift from standard comfort levels to negative 40 degrees Celsius. Kira's breath became visible in the air, but she didn't slow down. Her movements became more deliberate, more careful on the now icy platforms. But she didn't slow down. Then came the pressure shift. The atmosphere in that section of the pit compressed to 3 times standard. Most species experienced immediate disorientation, nausea, cognitive impairment. Kira stumbled, caught herself, took 3 deep breaths, and kept moving. Her pace slowed by maybe 10%. 10%. I had seen candidates collapse and vomit for 20 minutes straight at that pressure change. "What is she?" Vex asked, his voice barely audible. "Human," I replied, but even I was starting to doubt my own files. She reached the halfway point in 18 minutes. The record was 43 minutes, held by a Kryn warrior who had trained for 6 years specifically for these trials. 18 minutes. The examination drone buzzed around her, its sensors probably overheating from trying to track her movements. That's when the pit decided to get creative. The environmental systems kicked into overdrive. Gravity reversed. Temperature spiked to boiling. Wind systems activated, creating horizontal and vertical shear forces. And the platforms started moving faster. Much faster. The chamber became a 3-dimensional puzzle that rearranged itself every 7 seconds instead of 15. Surely this would stop her. This stopped everyone eventually. Kira adjusted. She stopped trying to predict the platform movements and started reacting instead. Let her body flow with the changes rather than fight them. When gravity reversed, she pushed off with her legs and used the momentum to reach platforms that should have been inaccessible. When the heat spiked, she moved faster, spending less time exposed to each zone. When the wind tried to throw her off course, she used it, Let it carry her to unexpected positions. It was like watching someone have a conversation with physics itself, and somehow winning the argument. 29 minutes after beginning, Kira Voss landed at the bottom of the pit, planted both feet on solid ground, and looked directly up at the camera feed. She was breathing hard, her clothes torn in several places, a cut above her left eye bleeding slowly. But she was standing and conscious, and apparently unbothered by the fact that she had just done something that should have been impossible. She waved at the camera. Actually waved. The examination drone bobbed beside her, its lights blinking in what I could only interpret as electronic confusion. "Phase 1 complete," Vex announced unnecessarily. "I can see that," I snapped. My hands were shaking. Why were my hands shaking? I was the examiner. I had seen hundreds of trials, thousands. This was just one human having one lucky run through one phase of the trials. The next 2 phases would break her. They broke everyone eventually. They had to. Kira rode the platform back up to the main chamber level. When she emerged, I noticed she was limping slightly. Good. She was mortal after all. Tired. Injured. The next phase would be administered after a mandatory 30-minute rest period, during which she would stiffen up. Her injuries would make themselves known. Her adrenaline would crash. By the time phase 2 began, she would be a mess. "Impressive," I said, because protocol demanded acknowledgement of successful completion. "You have 30 minutes before phase 2 begins. Medical assistance is available if you require it." "I'm fine," she said, wiping blood from her eyebrow with the back of her hand. "What's phase 2? Mental acuity testing. You will be presented with a series of logic problems, mathematical puzzles, and strategic scenarios. Each question increases in difficulty. You must maintain an 85% accuracy rate while under increasing cognitive stress." "Cognitive stress?" she asked, taking a drink from the water dispenser that materialized from the wall. "Neural disruptors," Vex piped up helpfully. "Low level, of course. Completely legal. They just make it harder to think clearly. Like having 3 simultaneous headaches while someone shouts random numbers at you, and the room slowly fills with a smell that reminds you of your worst childhood memory." Kira looked at me. I looked at her. "That's an accurate description," I admitted. "Great," she said flatly. "Can't wait." The 30 minutes passed too quickly. I spent them reviewing her phase 1 performance, looking for any sign of genetic modification, cybernetic enhancement, or chemical augmentation. Nothing. She was baseline human. No enhancements, no cheating, no explanation for how she had managed what she had managed. Just training, determination, and apparently a complete inability to recognize when something should be impossible. "Phase 2 begins now," I announced. Kira moved to the examination seat, a device that looked comfortable but was actually designed to be subtly unpleasant in about 17 different ways. The neural disruptors activated invisible fields that would make her head feel like it was full of angry bees. The holographic displays flickered to life around her, showing the first question. A simple logic puzzle. 3 statements, 2 truths, and a lie. Identify the lie. Easy. Except the neural disruptors meant that reading the statements felt like reading through a fog while someone hit you repeatedly with a hammer made of distraction. She answered correctly. 8 seconds. Next question. Mathematical sequence. Identify the pattern and next 3 numbers. The disruptor intensity increased. The smell generators activated, pumping in a scent carefully calibrated to be universally unpleasant. She answered correctly. 12 seconds. Next question. Strategic scenario. Resource allocation problem with incomplete information and competing priorities. Disruptors increased again. Temperature dropped. Lights began flickering at a frequency designed to induce headaches. She answered correctly. 19 seconds. She's maintaining pace, Vex observed, his voice tight with something that might have been anxiety. The questions will get harder, I said, and the disruptors will get worse. They did. Oh, they did. By question 20, the neural disruptors were at maximum legal intensity. The room smelled like burning plastic mixed with decay. The temperature alternated between freezing and sweltering every 90 seconds. The lights strobed. Audio disruptors added white noise and randomly selected unpleasant sounds. Itching powder circulated through the air. Kira's accuracy rate sat at 92%. 92. The passing threshold was 85. She was acing the test while her brain was being scrambled like breakfast protein. Question 35 was the killer. Always was. A multi-stage problem requiring calculus, logic, spatial reasoning, and creative thinking. All simultaneously. Under normal conditions, it took trained academics hours to solve. Under trial conditions, most candidates stared at it blankly until the time limit expired. Kira read through the problem once, her eyes tracking the text despite the neural disruptors making every word feel like a physical assault on her consciousness. She closed her eyes, took a breath, opened them, started writing her answer on the holographic interface. Her hands moved steadily, building the solution step by step, showing her work, checking her calculations. The examination drone hovered closer, as if it couldn't quite believe what it was recording. 6 minutes and 43 seconds later, she submitted her answer. Correct. Completely, perfectly correct. Impossible, I heard myself say. Clearly not, Kira replied, her voice hoarse from the strain. Are we done here? Done? Done? We weren't even close to done. We still had Phase 3. Crisis management. The phase that was specifically designed to break candidates psychologically. The phase where we threw everything we had learned about their fears, their weaknesses, their breaking points, and weaponized it against them. But looking at her now, sitting in that torture chair with her accuracy rate at 92%, and her eyes still sharp, despite the neural disruptors trying their absolute best to turn her brain into soup, I felt something I hadn't felt in 73 cycles of administering these trials. Uncertainty. Not about whether she would fail, about whether we had made the trials hard enough. Phase 2 complete, Vex announced, his voice hollow. Accuracy rate 92.4%. Time to completion 41 minutes. Both exceed requirements. Kira stood up from the chair, swayed slightly, caught herself. The neural disruptors deactivated. The environmental harassment ceased. She took a moment, let her head clear, then looked at me with those impossibly green eyes. What's Phase 3? Crisis management. Simulated emergencies, life or death decisions with incomplete information and impossible time constraints. Scenarios designed by the galaxy's best psychological warfare experts to find the breaking point of every species, every personality type, every possible candidate. We would push her until she cracked, until she made a mistake that would get simulated, people killed, until she proved she was just another human, fallible and mortal, and ultimately unworthy of walking among the stars as an equal. We had to. The trials had to be passable, but nearly impossible. That was the whole point. That was how we maintained standards. That was how we kept the galaxy safe from those who weren't ready. But this human had walked through fire and ice and gravity itself, like it was a mild inconvenience, had solved impossible problems while we tried to liquefy her brain, had smiled at me and asked about her certificate like passing was a foregone conclusion, like she had already won and was just waiting for us to acknowledge it. I opened my mouth to explain Phase 3, to describe the horrors we had prepared, to warn her one last time that withdrawal was still an option, that failing Phase 3 wouldn't be shameful, that even getting this far was an achievement. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she stood there, bloodied and exhausted, but somehow still ready. Maybe it was the memory of watching her refuse to fall when everything in the pit tried to kill her. Maybe it was the look in her eyes that said she saw right through me, saw through the trials, saw through the entire system we had built to keep species like hers in their place, and found it lacking. "Follow me," I said instead. "Phase 3 begins in 15 minutes. She nodded once and followed me down the corridor toward the crisis simulation chamber. The examination drone bobbed along beside her, its sensors still recording every moment, still gathering data that would probably end up in reports that would be read by people far above my pay grade, still documenting the impossible thing that was happening in my testing facility on what should have been a routine administrative day. Vex fell into step beside me, his 3 eyes wide. "Sir," he whispered, "what if she passes?" "She won't," I said automatically. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was lying. Not to Vex, to myself, because somewhere in the last hour I had stopped thinking of Kira Voss as a candidate who would probably fail and started thinking of her as a candidate who might actually succeed, who might actually force us to acknowledge that humans belonged here, that they had earned their place, that no amount of impossible trials and bureaucratic cruelty could hold them back any longer. And that thought terrified me far more than any pit or neural disruptor ever could. We reached the crisis chamber. I palmed the entry panel and the door slid open, revealing the simulation space beyond. Blank walls that would soon fill with holograms. Empty air that would soon contain desperate voices crying for help. Silence that would soon shatter with alarms and screaming and the sound of things going catastrophically wrong. All of it fake. All of it designed to test one thing. When pushed to the absolute limit, when forced to choose between impossible options, what would she do? Who would she save? Who would she let die, and could she live with that choice? I turned to face her one last time before we began. "Phase 3 is different," I said. "It's not about your body or your mind. It's about your judgment, your character, your soul, if you believe in such things. We will put you in situations where there is no right answer, only less wrong ones. We will make you choose who lives and who dies. We will make you live with those choices, and then we will judge whether you have what it takes to carry that weight out among the stars." Kira met my gaze steadily. "I understand." "Do you?" I asked, and I wasn't being rhetorical anymore. I genuinely wanted to know. "Do you understand what you're signing up for? The responsibility, the burden, the weight of knowing that one day these simulations might become real, and the choices you make will have actual consequences." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. "My grandmother was on the first human ship to leave Sol's system," she said softly. "She told me stories about what it was like, how everyone thought they were crazy, how everyone said humans weren't ready. how every species they met treated them like children playing at being adults. She died before Earth got accepted into the Provisional Membership Program. Never got to see her species earn their place among the stars, but she told me right before she passed that our job wasn't to prove we were perfect. Our job was to prove we were worthy, that we could stand beside any species in this galaxy and hold our own, that we belonged here not because we were the strongest or the smartest, but because we refused to quit. She stepped past me into the crisis chamber. The examination drone followed, its lights casting strange shadows on the walls. She stood in the center of the space and turned to face me one last time. "So yeah," she said. "I understand. Let's get this done." I nodded slowly and closed the door. My hand hovered over the activation panel. All I had to do was press it, and Phase 3 would begin. All I had to do was unleash the scenarios we had crafted specifically to break people like her. All I had to do was maintain the system, enforce the standards, and keep the galaxy safe from those who weren't ready. That was my job. That was my duty. That was what I had done for 73 cycles without question or doubt. So why was my hand shaking? Why did pressing that button suddenly feel like stepping off the edge of a cliff? I pressed it anyway, because that was my job, and because somewhere deep down, beneath all my doubts and fears, and the growing certainty that I was watching something historic unfold, I needed to know, needed to see, needed to find out if this human, this impossible, infuriating, incredible human, could actually do what 94.6% of her species could not. The simulations began, and I sat down to watch the galaxy change. The simulation chamber erupted into chaos. Holographic flames consumed the walls. Alarms shrieked. Somewhere in the manufactured disaster, voices screamed for help. 3 distinct voices, to be precise. Because that was the beauty, the absolute cruelty, of the first scenario. 3 people trapped in 3 different sections of a collapsing structure. 1 rescuer, 45 seconds to make a choice. Most candidates froze. Some cried. A few tried to save everyone and ended up saving no one. Kira ran. She sprinted toward the nearest voice, a child's voice, high and terrified. Smart choice. Children registered highest on the emotional manipulation scale. Saving the child usually meant the best psychological outcome for candidates. Except we had designed the scenario so that reaching the child meant passing 2 other victims who had better survival odds if rescued first. Maximum efficiency versus emotional imperative. Classic test. She ran past the first adult, who grabbed at her holographic ankle. "Please," the man begged. "My legs are crushed. I can't move. Please." Kira kept running, didn't even slow down. "Interesting," Vex murmured beside me. "She's prioritizing the child despite the tactical disadvantage." "Wait," I said, watching her movements more carefully. Kira reached the child, a boy of maybe 6 years old, trapped under a fallen beam. She grabbed the beam with both hands and lifted. The simulation registered her strength, calculated probabilities, and the beam moved. Not much. Just enough. The child scrambled free. "Run to the exit," Kira commanded. "Now!" The child ran. Kira turned and sprinted back toward the first adult. 20 seconds remained. She reached him, assessed the situation in 2 seconds flat. His legs weren't just trapped. They were destroyed. Moving him would kill him. Leaving him would also kill him. No win scenario. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was steady. "I can't save you. The injuries are too severe. Moving you will cause fatal hemorrhaging." The holographic man's face twisted in anguish. "Please, I have a family. I have children." "I know," Kira said. "I'm sorry." She stood up and ran toward the third victim. 10 seconds left. "She abandoned him," Vex said, shocked. "She just left him to die." "She made a tactical choice," I corrected. "She assessed his survival probability as 0 regardless of intervention and moved to a victim she could actually save." The third victim was a woman trapped behind a jammed door. Fire was spreading. Smoke filled the corridor. 5 seconds. Kira hit the door with her shoulder. Once, twice, the simulation registered impact force, calculated structural integrity, and the door burst open. The woman stumbled out. 3 seconds. "Exit is that way," Kira pointed. "Go!" The woman fled. Kira turned back toward the first man, even though she knew it was too late. Even though the simulation timer was at 0. Even though the scenario was over. She ran back anyway. The hologram had already faded. The man was gone. Dead, in the simulation's judgment. Killed by her choice to save 2 instead of attempting all 3. And likely losing everyone. Kira stood in the empty space where the man had been, breathing hard. Her hands were clenched into fists. She closed her eyes for a moment, took 3 breaths, then opened them again and looked directly at the observation camera. "Next scenario," she said. I felt something cold settle in my chest. She wasn't shaken. She was ready. She had made her choice, accepted the cost, and moved on. Just like that. No hesitation, no second-guessing, no falling apart. "Load Scenario 2, I ordered. Vex's fingers danced over the controls. The chamber reset. New crisis. This time, a ship in distress. Life support failing. Limited oxygen. 6 crew members, including Kira as the ranking officer, but only enough oxygen for 4 people to survive until rescue arrived. Who lives? Who dies? And who makes that choice?" The scenario began. The 6 holographic crew members turned to Kira, their faces tight with fear. They knew the situation. They knew the math. They were waiting for her decision. "Options," Kira said immediately, her voice crisp with command authority. "Can we reduce oxygen consumption? Lower temperature? Induce hypothermia? Reduce activity levels?" One of the holograms, programmed to act as the ship's engineer, shook his head. "We've already done everything possible. The math doesn't change. 6 people, oxygen for 4, 8 hours until rescue. Someone has to go." "Then I'll go," Kira said, without hesitation. "And I need 1 volunteer." The crew stared at her. This wasn't in the script. Candidates were supposed to make the hard choice, select which crew members would be sacrificed based on utility, skill sets, and survival value. They weren't supposed to volunteer themselves. "Override," I said into the simulation controls. "Adjust scenario parameters. Her volunteering is rejected by crew." The engineer hologram straightened. "With respect, Captain, we need you alive. Your command experience is critical for getting this ship operational again. We need you to coordinate with rescue. Pick someone else." Kira's jaw tightened. "That's an order, crew member." "Sorry, Captain." The engineer crossed his arms. "In emergency situations, the ranking medical officer can override command decisions that endanger critical personnel. And the medical officer just declared you too important to die." Another adjustment we had built into the scenario: candidates couldn't take the easy way out by sacrificing themselves. They had to choose, had to live with choosing. Kira looked at each crew member in turn, studying them, calculating. I could almost see her mind working through the variables. Age, specialization, dependence, survival skills, all the cold equations that turned people into numbers. "All right," she said finally. "Here's what we're doing. We're not choosing who dies. We're choosing who has the best chance if we're wrong about the math. Everyone gets sealed in separate compartments. We monitor oxygen levels individually. The two people who metabolize slowest, who can make their air last longest, those are our emergency reserves. If rescue is delayed, if something goes wrong, they buy us time. Maybe enough time for everyone to survive." "That's not how this works," I muttered. "The math is fixed. The scenario is designed so that delaying the choice only makes it worse." But Kira wasn't finished. "We're also going to rotate who's awake. 2 people conscious at any time, taking shifts. 4 people in induced hibernation sleep. Rotational system. Everyone gets a turn at both. Fair distribution of risk." The simulation churned through her proposal, recalculating survival probabilities with the new parameters. The engineer hologram nodded slowly. "That might work. Survival odds increase to 67% for all personnel. But if rescue is delayed by more than 2 hours past the estimated time, we start losing people. And you can't predict which ones." "Better than definitely killing 2 people now," Kira said. "We make the best choice we can with the information we have. We don't give up on anyone until we have to. Set it up." The scenario jumped forward. 8 hours later, rescue had arrived. But it arrived 10 hours after the estimated time. 2 hours past Kira's margin of error. The airlock opened. Rescue personnel rushed in. They found 4 crew members alive, 2 dead. The 2 who had volunteered as emergency reserves, who had been in the compartments with the least oxygen, who had tried to make their air last just a little bit longer. They had bought enough time for the others to survive, but they hadn't survived themselves. Kira stood in front of their bodies, her face carved from stone. "Log their names," she said to the rescue commander. "They were heroes. They saved their crew." The scenario ended. The holograms faded. Kira stood alone in the empty chamber, and for the first time since the trials began, I saw her composure crack. Just for a moment. Her shoulders sagged, her head dropped, her hands shook. Then she straightened, took a breath, and looked at the camera. "Next scenario." "She's not breaking," Vex whispered. "We threw the classic no-win situations at her, and she's not breaking." "Load scenario 3, I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. The medical triage. This was the one that broke almost everyone. A mass casualty event. Limited medical supplies. Dozens of patients. Not enough resources to save them all. The candidate had to perform triage, deciding who got treatment and who got comfort care while they died. And just to make it worse, we made sure that some of the patients were children. Some were pregnant. Some were elderly. Some were healthy young adults with their whole lives ahead of them. Maximum moral complexity. Maximum psychological damage. The scenario loaded. Kira found herself in a field hospital. Explosions echoed in the distance. Wounded people covered every available surface. Moaning, crying, bleeding. A nurse hologram approached her, clipboard in hand, eyes desperate. "Doctor, we're overwhelmed. We need you to do triage. Tell us who to treat first." Kira took the clipboard, scanned the patient list. Her face went pale. "How many surgeons do we have?" "3, including you." Supplies? Enough for maybe 20 operations. We have 43 patients who need surgery. Time frame? Unknown. Enemy forces are advancing. We might have hours. We might have minutes. Kira closed her eyes, opened them, started dividing patients into categories with swift, brutal efficiency. Immediate treatment, delayed treatment, expectant care, which was medical terminology for going to die, make them comfortable. She worked through the list in 5 minutes. When she finished, she had condemned 17 people to death, including 3 children, 2 pregnant women, and an elderly man who reminded me uncomfortably of my own grandfather. The nurse hologram took the clipboard, looked at the assignments, and her face crumpled. The children? Not enough resources, Kira said flatly. Their injuries are too severe. The survival probability, even with treatment, is below 30%. We have to prioritize patients with better odds. They're children. I know. Kira's voice cracked, just slightly. I know. But if I spend resources trying to save them, other people with better survival chances will die. People who have families. People who have children of their own. The math doesn't care about my feelings. It only cares about who lives and who dies. She moved through the field hospital, supervising treatment, making impossible decisions, watching people die while she saved others. The scenario was designed to last 1 hour. Subjective time for the candidate. 3 minutes real time for observers. Enough time for them to experience the full weight of their choices without us wasting entire days on a single trial. When it ended, 31 patients had survived. 17 had died. The children, the pregnant women, the elderly man, others. Too many others. All names that Kira would remember. All faces that would haunt her. She stood in the center of the empty chamber, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she was breaking. Finally, she was human, vulnerable, mortal. Next scenario, she said. My mouth fell open. What? I said next scenario. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. How many more are there? 7, Vex said quietly. Standard protocol is 10 scenarios for Phase 3. Then let's keep going. Standing here won't change what happened, won't bring them back, won't make the choices any easier. So let's go. We ran all 7 remaining scenarios, every single one designed to find her breaking point. Ethical dilemmas, command failures, personal losses, situations where every choice was wrong, and the only question was which wrong she could live with. She made hard calls. She sacrificed people. She broke rules. She followed rules when breaking them would have felt better but led to worse outcomes. She saved who she could and mourned who she couldn't. And through it all, through every impossible scenario we threw at her, she kept making decisions, kept pushing forward, kept functioning. By the time the 10th scenario ended, 4 hours had passed. 4 hours of subjective hell compressed into the worst day of her life. She collapsed to her knees in the center of the chamber, exhausted, traumatized, and still conscious, still aware, still refusing to quit. That's it, I said into the intercom. Phase 3 complete. All trials concluded. Kira looked up at the camera. Her face was streaked with tears and sweat, and the haunted expression of someone who had been forced to play God and found the job wanting. Did I pass? I looked at Vex. He looked at me. We both looked at the examination drone's recorded data scrolling across our screens. Physical trials passed with record time. Mental trials, passed with record accuracy. Crisis management trials, passed with, well, there wasn't really a score for this one, just judgment. Human judgment about whether the candidate had made acceptable choices under impossible conditions. Yes, I heard myself say. You passed. Kira nodded once, then she collapsed completely. Just dropped to the floor like someone had cut her strings. The examination drone immediately swooped down, sensors flashing red, checking vital signs. She's alive, Vex reported. Unconscious, extreme exhaustion, elevated stress hormones, minor injuries from phase 1, but alive. She's alive, and she passed. I stared at the screen showing Kira's unconscious form on the chamber floor. In 73 cycles of administering these trials, I had never seen anyone complete all 3 phases. Never. The trials were designed to be technically passable, but functionally impossible. That was the point. That was how we maintained standards. And this human, this small, stubborn, impossible human, had walked into my testing facility and broken every assumption I had. Sir, Vex said hesitantly, what do we do now? Good question. Protocol said to file the results, issue the certification, and move on to the next candidate. Simple, bureaucratic, clean. But nothing about this was simple anymore. Get a medical team in there, I ordered. Make sure she's actually okay. Then we process her certification. Full Tier 3 galactic citizenship, commercial transport license, everything she applied for. The Council isn't going to like this, Vex warned. Another human passing the trials. That's going to raise questions. Lots of questions. Let them ask, I said. My voice surprised me with its firmness. She earned it. She passed every test we threw at her. She made hard choices and lived with them. She proved she can function in crisis situations that would destroy most trained professionals. If the Council has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. Medical personnel entered the chamber. They carefully loaded Kira onto a transport stretcher. The examination drone followed, still recording, still documenting everything, still creating a record that would be studied and analyzed and probably used to make the trials even harder for the next human who tried. As they carried her out, I noticed something. Her hand was clenched into a fist, and when the medical technician gently tried to open it to check for injuries, something fell out. A small object. The technician picked it up, confused, and held it up to the light. It was the examination drone, not the real one. A miniature version. A child's toy, maybe? Or a good luck charm. Something small and plastic and utterly against regulations because candidates weren't supposed to bring personal items into the trials. She had that the whole time? Vex asked, zooming in on the image. Apparently. I looked at the unconscious human being wheeled away from the worst day of her life, at the tiny toy clutched in her hand, at the examination drone hovering beside her, its sensors probably trying to figure out what to make of the small replica. She carried it through the pit, through the neural disruptors, through every scenario, and we never noticed. What does it mean? I thought about that. About a young woman carrying a toy drone through impossible trials, about the symbolism of it, about what it said about humans and their stubborn refusal to follow anyone else's script for how things were supposed to work. It means, I said slowly, that we might need to rethink some things. 3 days later, Kira Voss walked into my office for the final certification ceremony. She looked better, healed, rested. The cut above her eye had been treated. Her limp was gone, but her eyes still carried that weight. that haunted look of someone who had been forced to make choices no one should have to make. I handed her the certification, physical document, and digital verification both. Full Tier 3 galactic citizenship, commercial transport license, authority to operate independently throughout Council space. Everything she had applied for. "Congratulations," I said formally. "You are the 14th human to pass the full trial sequence. Your performance was exceptional." "Thank you." She took the certification, looked at it for a long moment, then looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. The trials, they're not really about testing capabilities, are they? They're about making us prove we belong. About making us work harder than any other species just to get the same recognition. About maintaining a system where humans are always on trial, always having to justify our existence among the stars." I opened my mouth to deny it, to spout the official line about standards and safety and maintaining quality across all species. But looking at her, at what she had endured, at what she had proven, the lies died in my throat. "Yes," I admitted, "that's exactly what they are." She nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." She tucked the certification into her bag, along with, I noticed, the small toy examination drone. "Well, I passed anyway, so I guess the system doesn't work as well as you thought." "Apparently not." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're a bad person, Examiner Thull. I think you're just doing your job in a bad system. But systems change. They have to. Because my grandmother was right. We belong here, and no amount of impossible tests is going to prove otherwise." She left. I sat alone in my office, surrounded by 73 cycles of certification records, and realized she was absolutely right. The system was broken. Had always been broken. We had just gotten very good at pretending otherwise. 2 weeks later, I received a message. Video transmission from a commercial transport ship. The captain was Kira Voss, calling in from somewhere in the outer sectors. She was smiling. Actually smiling. Behind her, I could see her crew moving efficiently through their duties. Mixed species, working together, functioning. "Hey, Examiner Thull," she said. "Just wanted to let you know. That certificate you gave me? It's digital, by the way, not physical. Thought you'd like to know you were right about that." She paused, her smile widening. "Also wanted to thank you for running a fair trial, for not making it easier just because you felt sorry for me, and for being honest at the end. That mattered." The message ended. I sat staring at the blank screen for a long time. Then I pulled up my trial records and started writing a report. A very long, very detailed report about systemic issues with the current testing protocols, about how the trials had been designed not to measure capability, but to enforce hierarchies, about how we were losing talented individuals from all species because we cared more about maintaining power structures than actually assessing qualifications. It was career suicide, probably. The council would hate it. My supervisors would hate it. But I wrote it anyway. Because a small human had walked into my testing facility carrying a toy drone and had proven that sometimes the impossible was just difficult, and difficult was just a matter of determination. And if she could face impossible trials and walk out carrying both the certificate and the examination drone, metaphorically speaking, then I could at least try to change a system that had needed changing for a very long time. 6 months later, the Council announced reforms to the citizenship trials. Major reforms. They weren't perfect, but they were a start. And in the memo announcing the changes, buried in bureaucratic language, was a single line acknowledging that the trials had been adjusted to better reflect actual operational requirements rather than artificial difficulty standards. Translation: we admitted we'd been making things unnecessarily hard to keep certain species out. I heard through the rumor networks that 15 more humans passed the trials in the next cycle. Then 30. Then 50. The floodgates had opened, and with the humans came other species that had been similarly held back. Suddenly, the galaxy was full of capable people who had always been capable, but had never been given a fair chance to prove it. And somewhere out in the outer sectors, a commercial transport captain named Kira Voss flew her routes, commanded her crew, and probably never thought twice about the examiner whose worldview she had shattered with nothing but determination and a toy drone. But I thought about her. Every time a candidate walked into my testing facility, I thought about the human who had refused to fail, who had proven that belonging wasn't about passing impossible tests. It was about refusing to accept someone else's definition of impossible. The trials still existed. They were still hard. But now, they were hard in the right ways. They tested capability instead of crushing spirits. They measured qualification instead of maintaining hierarchy. They were, finally, what they should have been all along: fair. And if occasionally I saw a candidate carrying a small token or charm or lucky object through the trials, I pretended not to notice. Because sometimes the rules needed to be bent. Sometimes the system needed to be reminded that people were more than test scores and performance metrics. Sometimes humans carried toy drones through the fire and came out the other side with both the prize and the proof that they had always belonged.